This video was sponsored by Policy Genius.
Oh, hi. Welcome to my kitchen. Now, a few weeks ago, my wife bought a new dishwasher. Our old one broke down, and she decided to get a panel-ready dishwasher. Now, if you don't know what a panel-ready dishwasher is, you're not alone, neither did I. Basically, it's a dishwasher that they charge you more money for, but it doesn't have a front on it. And the idea is that you can put a front on it to match your cabinets, and so then it looks like a cabinet. And she said, "You can build that, right?" And I said, yeah, sure, why not? But to tell you the truth, I've never done this before in my life. So I thought, why not make a video out of it? It could be entertaining to watch me struggle through this. So I'm going to attempt to build a panel for this dishwasher to make it look exactly like the matching cabinets, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. Could go either way. But watch the video, follow along. You might learn something. I know I'm going to. Check the video description for links to all the products I may or may not use for this. Also, there's a link to our website. We got new hats up on the website, a bunch of them, so check that out. And there's a whole bunch of other links to other things too. Now, let's get to work.
The first and most annoying step in any project that you've never done before commonly consists of this: reading the flippin' instructions. I hate instructions. They're frustrating, and often they're not even right, which just leaves you more frustrated. And mark my words, because I already know what's going to happen at the end of this video, these instructions will come back to bite me in the butt. But I don't want to give away the ending, so let's just get on with it. The instructions basically laid out the exact size and shape that my panel needed to be, as well as giving some generic instructions on how to mount the panel to the front of the dishwasher. I decided to stop looking at the instructions and just go in and look at the actual dishwasher and see if I could make any sense of this whole thing. And that's when I realized my first problem. The dishwasher was full of dishes, so I had to unload those before I could do anything else. Darn house chores. Now, the first problem I had to solve was the fact that the dishwasher was too high, right up against the top of my counter. And I wanted the panel in the dishwasher to be level with the top of the drawer. So I was going to need to figure out a way to lower the dishwasher down to get it level with the top of that drawer on the left-hand side. So I crawled down on my stomach, pretending to know what I was doing, and started fiddling around with things. Now, the instructions did help in the way that they told me there was this little Allen keyhole on the front, and apparently when you twist that, it lowers the feet in the back, so you don't have to pull the thing all the way out to lower all the feet. Supposedly. But, you know, instructions. They always have good suggestions that never seem to work out. So after fiddling around with the feet and that little Allen key thing, I decided I was just going to have to rip this thing out of here if I really wanted to get the feet in the proper position. So I did a little shimmy, I did a little shake, and I danced. And sadly, this dishwasher is not the worst dance partner I've ever had. Once I got the dishwasher out, I figured it would be much easier to lower everything down to the proper height. But it really wasn't. It was still a pain. Why do they make these things so hard to tinker with? I was able to reach under there and engage that back foot, and then once I got it started, finally that little Allen key thing on the front started to do its thing, and the back lowered down. And then I just adjusted the front feet until everything was nice and level and should be right around the correct height to match up with that drawer face that I'm trying to line everything up to. So after adjusting the feet, I shimmied and I shaked that whole thing back into place, making sure not to push anything too hard. I didn't want to crimp a water hose or a drain pipe or some other doohickey that is beyond my skill set. But thankfully, I think I got it all back in the right order, and now, as you can see, the dishwasher door is somewhat level with that drawer face. So that's good. But now there's this nice gap at the top of the dishwasher. So I'm gonna have to cut a piece of wood and paint it to match the cabinets to fill that gap. But once I install it, it should make the whole cabinet seem somewhat seamless. You see, here's the top of the dishwasher, here's the top of the drawer. That's why I had to lower it down. I want that panel to just match up so everything looks proper. Now the panel is meant to hang down below the actual dishwasher so that it can fold up underneath as the dishwasher opens. So I needed to measure and figure out how far down I could actually make that overhang. It said 2 15/16 in the instructions, but I don't trust instructions. So I just folded the door down on my face and took some measurements. And it was 2 15/16. But that's not important, okay? The instructions are evil. With my dishwasher lowered down to the proper height and all my measurements figured out, it was time to actually start making my panel. Now I'm gonna make this just like a normal shaker style cabinet door. So I rough cut all of my pieces, a little longer than they needed to be, and started milling them up. To make the door, I'm using hard maple, because I think that's what I used when I built the cabinets, although I don't remember. It was a few years ago. But hard maple is a great wood to use in a kitchen, and it paints very nicely. So I started running everything through the joiner, ripping it down on the table saw to the right width, and then finally I walked over to the planer and planed everything down to just at 3/4 of an inch. With everything milled down and looking fresh and clean, I set to work cutting my stiles to the correct length. Now whenever I'm making a shaker style door, I always cut my stiles first because their length is their length. Unlike the rails, which you've got to account for the tenons that stick into the stiles. But don't worry, I'll explain all this as we go. So after I got my stile measurement, I set up a little stop block on my miter saw fence so I could make repeatable cuts. But really, I just have to cut 2. I mean, I'm making one flippin' door. Anyways, after my stiles are cut, I needed to take measurements for my rails. Now I decided to do a 1-inch tenon coming off each side of my rail. So I just smush my 2 stiles together and then measure off that to get the overall width of my panel. Then all I have to do is add 2 inches onto that length to account for my 1-inch tenon on either side, and that's how long I need to cut my rails. But keep in mind, I will be cutting tenons and then it'll all shrink back down to the right size. And if none of that made any sense, well, just be patient. It'll all come together in the end. Have faith. So after cutting my rails down to the right size, I went over and plopped them between my stiles. Now, if I did this correctly when I measure from left to right, this should be exactly 2 inches wider than I need it to be. Now, according to the instructions and the size of my dishwasher, it needs to be 23 7/8. So 2 inches longer than 23 7/8 is 25 7/8. It looks like I hit the nail right on the head. So with all my pieces cut out, it was time to start hooking them together. Now the first thing I'm going to do is put a 1/4 inch groove down the center of each one of my rail and stile pieces. Well, approximately 1/4 inch. The way I do this and make sure that it's perfectly centered in my board is I mark the center of my board and then I set my table saw blade height at exactly 1 inch. I line up the blade just to the right of that center point with it hanging over just a tad bit. Then I run the board through on one side with the 1/8 inch blade, and then I flip the whole thing around and run it through on the other side. This might be just a hair under 1/4 inch, but I know that it is absolutely centered in my board because I ran it through on both sides. So I'm just going to do this to all 4 pieces, my 2 rails and my 2 stiles. And then with all those grooves cut, I can start marking out to cut the tenons on my rail pieces. Because I want 1-inch tenons, I just took a 1-inch setup block, plopped it right on the end of my piece, and then using an X-Acto knife, I'm just going to score a little line to mark exactly where I want to cut my tenon to. I like using the X-Acto knife because it gives me a nice, crisp, clean line, unlike a pencil, which is all foggy and hairy and ambiguous. I had a library teacher that was very ambiguous in middle school. I never knew what she was up to. Anyways, with my rails marked out for my 1-inch tenon, I took them over to my dado saw and I set a stop block so that I could cut exactly at 1 inch. Then I lowered the blade until it was just at the same height as the little piece of wood on my rail before it gets to the groove. Sorry, I don't have a better way to describe that. Then when I thought I had the height correct on my blade, I ran a piece through as a tester. Now what I'm testing here is the width of my tenon. It's got to be the exact same width as the slot I cut over on the table saw. So I just run a scrap piece of wood through a couple times, zip, zap, zoop, and then I grab my piece of the groove in and test to see how it fits. And it is way too loose. So I adjust my blade accordingly, run it again until I've got a nice snug fit. Now that my blade height is correct, my stop block is set up to cut a 1-inch tenon, I can start running my pieces through. Now I could have put a 1-inch dado stack in here, but it was already set up for a 1/2 inch and I'm lazy and didn't want to switch it out. So I just set my stop block to cut at 1 inch, and then I'll just run every piece through to set the length of my tenon and remove the stop block and clean up the excess. You'll see what I mean here in just a second. After running it through on all 4 sides, here we go, number 4. All right, now the length of my tenon is set. So I can remove the stop block and now just cut the excess because length doesn't matter. We're just removing material. And if I've done everything correctly, these should be perfectly cut 1-inch tenons that will slide gracefully into my pre-cut grooves on my stiles. If I've done everything correctly. And what do you know? A blind fish does catch a cat every now and then. Yes, perfect fit. So with the outer frame of my panel all cut and styled and railed and all that garbage, I could hook it together, and now I have the actual dimensions of my panel, which means I can take this whole thing, walk into my house, and see if I'm anywhere close to the right size. Boy, if the instructions are wrong, I'm gonna be pissed. So with absolutely no faith in my measurements, because I took them off of the instructions, I walked inside, plopped it on the dishwasher, and it looks to be exactly the right size. It opens and shuts, it fits everywhere it needs to fit. Maybe I spoke too soon about those instructions. No, I didn't. I've seen the end of this video, just wait. Those instructions are garbage. Anywho, that's a story for another time. With my frame complete, I could now measure and cut for my panel. The measurement for my panel is pretty simple. I just measure the inside of my frame and then add 1 inch to every side, or 2 inches to my height and 2 inches to my width, whatever way you want to do it. Anyways, I grabbed some 1/2 inch Baltic birch, I went over to the table saw and I cut it down to that dimension. Now I know what you're saying, 1/2 inch? I thought you cut a 1/4 inch groove, you doofus, you screwed up. Well, no, I didn't, just watch. Yes, this is 1/2 inch, and yes, my groove is 1/4 inch, but I really want my panel to be completely flush on the back, even though it's gonna be inset on the front. So the best way to do this is use 1/2 inch stock and then cut a rabbet around the entire perimeter, bringing it down to 1/4 inch so that it's flush on the back and flat on the front, or inset on the front and flush on the back. Anyways, I set up a sacrificial fence with these little rockler fence clamps and I started cutting that rabbet. Not cutting an actual rabbet, that would be animal cruelty. I'm just cutting a rabbet cut on the side of my board. This is just a test piece, just to make sure my blade height is correct, but it's gonna look something like this. After cutting the rabbet to the appropriate height, as you can see, it is nice and flush. This is the back of the panel, but when I flip it over, oh, it's nice and inset on the front. This will make mounting it to the dishwasher much, much easier. So I take my actual panel and I start running it through a bunch. Again, I just left that 1/2-inch dado in there because I'm lazy and made multiple passes. Eventually, I had a nice 1/4-inch rabbet going around the entire outside of my panel, and it slid very nicely in place. So I plopped on my last style as a nice dry fit, and boom goes the flippin' dynamite. My panel was all, well, dry fit. I mean, I still gotta glue it together and sand it and everything, but as you can see, it's nice and flush on the back, so I can mount it easily, and inset and looks just like a shaker door on the front. So happy and confident with all my measurements, I started gluing my panel together. You know, just rubbing a little glue there, smushing a little glue over here, plopping everything back into place, flipping it over, and doing the same thing on the other side until all of those mortises were glued nice and secure into my tenons or grooves on my style pieces. And then of course, I put the whole thing in clamps to squeeze the guts out of it. And when I say guts, I mean this. Blech. No, those aren't real guts, that's just glue. Don't be alarmed, children. And last but not least, I took a square and just made sure everything was, well, square. I mean, it is a square and that's what you do with it. And it was perfect.
You know, working in the shop gives me a lot of time to think about the future. Think about different plans, different goals, and sometimes I think about, what if I'm not around anymore? What if the worst would happen? Is my family going to be taken care of? And that's why life insurance is so important. And that's why I'm so glad to share the sponsor of this video, which is Policy Genius, which makes getting life insurance so stinking easy. And this is how they do it.
The proprietary technology at Policy Genius makes it easy to save. In minutes, you can compare personalized quotes from top companies to find the lowest price and coverage you need. You could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. Their team of licensed experts will help you understand your options and ensure you apply for the right policy. You see, Policy Genius works for you, not the insurance companies, so you can trust them to offer unbiased advice and help you navigate every step of the shopping and buying process.
Well, that's all well and good, but how do you sign up? Where do you go? How do you get started? What do you do? Well, don't worry, you just do this.
All you gotta do is head to policygenius.com/bourbonmoth to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save.
When it comes to life insurance, it's nice to get it right.
The next morning, after my glue was sufficiently dry, I came out and popped that panel out of the clamps, and boy, was it happy to see me. No, it wasn't. It's a piece of wood. It doesn't know me. It's not even alive. You guys are weird. Before I got started sanding, because I will do anything to procrastinate sanding, I still needed to cut my little piece that I had to add to the top of the dishwasher. So I ripped down a 1.5-inch piece of maple, I cut it to the right length, and I carried it inside to wedge it in place and make sure it would fit. I wanted a nice, tight fit. And what do you know? I got a nice, tight fit. Beautiful. Once that's painted, it will cover up that gap and hopefully look like this dishwasher was always supposed to be a panel front dishwasher and not something my wife bought because it was on sale. Anywho, I needed a way to anchor that piece into the cabinet, so I got out my Craig jig and just grilled a few, not grilled, they're not hamburgers, I drilled a few pocket holes. With that taken care of, I set to sanding. Of course, it was unavoidable, and I sanded down this panel to get it ready to paint. The backside I really just went over once. You're not going to see it, who cares? But I did spend a little extra time making sure the front side was nice and smooth. I even took some sandpaper and broke down that internal edge by hand. That's right. Just because you hate sanding doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Now, in my endeavors to read the instructions earlier, I realized that the instructions also doubled as a template, which marked out exactly where I need to add some little clips and brackets and screws that should allow me to just slide this panel into place on the front of the dishwasher. So I cut out the instructions to get rid of all the waste, and then I measured out from the top a 1/2 inch because I decided to leave a 1/2 inch overhang on the top, even though the instructions didn't call for that. So I brought the instructions down a 1/2 inch, I taped them in place, and now according to everything I read, all these markings should be exactly where all these clips need to go. So, with the template still in place, I took a drill, I drilled right through the instructions, exactly where it's telling me to, and I read it multiple times. I'm just saying that right now because I'm going to get pissed here in a second, and I want it to be said that I didn't overlook something I carefully read. Anyways, I drilled some more holes in the top, and then I installed this little plastic clip that's supposed to somehow magically hook the dishwasher door to the front of the dishwasher. And then on the top, all you had to do was install these little panhead screws, leaving them an 1/8 inch proud, and those are supposed to hook into some little eye bolt slot things, keyholes. I think that's what they're called. Okay, so just to review, I've got my clip in the bottom, and I've got these 2 screws in the top. The 2 screws in the top are supposed to hook into some little keyholes, and that clip in the bottom is supposed to hook onto something. So I carried the entire thing into the kitchen, expecting that my instructions were going to be accurate and that everything was going to slide right into place. Now here's the moment of confusion. You can see it on my face. I'm like, what the heck? Those screws on the top are nowhere close where they need to be. And I know what you're thinking. I moved the whole thing down a 1/2 inch. That probably screwed it up. Well, look at this. Here's the screw up here, and there should be something about there. Like 4 or 5 inches down is where those little keyhole slots are. What the heck? I mean, it makes no sense. And then when I was trying to slide the bottom thing into place, this little plastic clip just snapped off. Yeah, real quality work, stupid instruction people. I even had my shop assistant Craig come in and look at it, and he couldn't figure it out either. The best I could determine is that they just sent the wrong instructions for this dishwasher. The fact that I was able to get this far with these horrible instructions was a miracle. So that's when I went rogue. I just decided to say forget the instructions and take measurements directly off the dishwasher and put the screws where I thought they needed to go. Because I obviously know better than some dishwasher experts. And what do you know? First try. Got that thing locked right in place, and boom. Who needs instructions? I told you guys they were garbage. Now, because that bottom clip broke, this thing's like barely hanging on there. It's really just those 2 screws on the top slid into place that are holding it. So I very carefully opened the door. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how are you going to attach it? Well, the instructions did tell me that there's these screws on the inside of the dishwasher that you remove once you get your panel in place. I used clamps because my instructions betrayed me. Once it was clamped securely right where I wanted, I removed these little screws and I replaced them with these larger screws. Those would hold the panel firmly to the front of the dishwasher and everything would be nice and secure. Have I mentioned I wasted a lot of time trying to figure out those instructions and I think they're dumb? Because I want you to know I think the instructions were dumb, and if I'm not being clear about the instructions being dumb, I just wanted to make sure I say it again. Anyways, one at a time, I removed all the little screws, I replaced them with the big screws, and you might also be asking, why are you doing this now? The thing's not even painted. Well, I am so glad I did this now and didn't figure out that all the measurements were wrong after I painted it. At least this way I could fumble around, get it exactly right, and then paint it and know it should be fairly easy to install it. Speaking of doing things before I paint, there was one last thing I needed to do before painting the panel, and that was install this appliance handle. That's professional lingo for a giant drawer pull. So I marked out exactly where it needed to land at the top of the panel. I pre-drilled on the front, and then I flipped the whole thing over and I drilled some countersunk holes in the back so that the screws to mount the handle on the front wouldn't stick out proud on the back and run into the dishwasher. And then, of course, I screwed it in place just to make sure that everything was going to work the way it should. And I think it will. Yeah, that's one big, expensive drawer pull. Now, time for my least favorite thing in the entire world. No, it's not sanding. Believe it or not, that is my second least favorite thing. My first least favorite thing is painting absolutely anything. It stinks. There's just so much setup for one little thing. Like having to cover my floor so I don't get green overspray all over my beautiful, well, now that I look at it, that floor's pretty ugly. Why did I put canvas down? I don't know. Anyways, I pulled out my Q5 HVLP Fuji spray system, sprayed the entire thing with a coat of primer on the back, sanded with a little 2000 grit sandpaper on my panel, as well as my little filler piece, and flipped the whole thing over, and you guessed it, sprayed primer on the front. Now if you're looking at that thinking, man, that's very bumpy and orange peely, it's really not. I don't know why my sprayer started doing this, but it sprays out a ton of air bubbles. Maybe someone out there can tell me what's up. The good news is they don't stick around long. As soon as they're on the board for about 5 minutes, the air bubbles all go away and it's a perfectly smooth surface, but it looks gnarly coming out of the gun. Anyways, I then sprayed a coat of green paint and another coat of green paint, and then I sprayed one more coat of green paint until I had a nice green looking cabinet door, which should perfectly match the other green cabinet accessories in my kitchen. After letting my paint dry and cure for a day or two, I hauled the panel over to my workbench and reinstalled this appliance handle, or appliance pole, the really big drawer pull thing. Yep, that works. And then it was back into the kitchen. Now the first thing I needed to do was install that little filler piece at the top, which meant that once again I had to pull the entire dishwasher out from the inside of the cabinets. I'm getting pretty darn good at this point. Then I took my little filler piece and wedged it in place, obviously with those pocket holes on the back side. Ain't nobody want to see any pocket holes sticking out the front. Once I had it wedged firmly in place, I reached down in there and screwed it in with those pocket holes. In what seems like the 27th time, I shoved the dishwasher back in the cabinet. I'm starting to wonder why I paid somebody to come install this. It was like an extra $25 when we ordered the thing. I mean, how hard is it to shove a dishwasher inside a cabinet? Anyways, as you can see, we've got these screws on the back that are repositioned to fit correctly, unlike what the instructions wanted me to do. And those should slide into those little keyholes. That'll hold it in place long enough for me to get those internal screws in there. So I lined it up with the keyholes, I plopped it in place, and I folded the entire door down. Then I measured to make sure all my reveals and overhangs were where I wanted them, and I screwed in my long screws. I think there was like 6 screws total. So why the instructions don't just say, hey, build a panel the right size, clamp it onto the front of your dishwasher and screw it in with some screws? I don't know. That seems a little easier to me. But look, we did it. A custom panel for the dishwasher. And it looks pretty darn good. There was just one thing left to do, and that was to secure the dishwasher into its correct location. This is just done with a few screws through the side of the dishwasher, and then you cover those up with a nice waterproof plastic plug. And boom, installed. Well, I guess there is just one more thing that needs to be done. Now, when we got the new dishwasher, I ripped off the original toe kick on the bottom so that we could take the old dishwasher out and put the new one in. Now, I never had tacked this toe kick in place. I just kind of wedged it in there. And I always told my wife, eventually I'll nail it in, but I never got around to it, which was very convenient when I had to replace the dishwasher. And of course, I told my wife again that I will nail it down. But between you and me, that thing will be wedged under there, unnailed, until the day we die. The important part is, I built a panel for a flippin' dishwasher, even though the instructions were trying to kill me. And with that, I need a break.
Well, what do you know? I did it. What did we learn from this? Never follow the instructions. They're stupid and should be thrown away immediately. Those instructions literally were the worst I've ever seen. They didn't get me anywhere close to getting this installed. But I got it figured out in the end, and I have to admit, it really cleans up the space. So, hope you enjoyed that. Check the video description for links to our Patreon page, new merchandise up on the website, as well as a bunch of other tools and supplies I used in this video. Now, I gotta unload these dishes. The work never ends.